Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast, and today I have a friend and colleague on here with me, Liz Weber. Liz has been doing consulting work, specifically for businesses and for nonprofits. Liz has helped me over the years do many strategic plannings with a nonprofit that I was involved with. But Liz, I will turn it over to you to give the more appropriate background and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So, Amos, as you know, but for your listeners, basically what I do, I'm a business advisor and coach for the C-suite business owners and boards of directors. And in a pithy way of saying it, I help these leaders focus on the right things at the right time to get the right impact. And how I do that is typically through three main service lines. And the first one is, as you alluded to already, facilitating strategic planning exercises, whether it's a retreat, it's a full-blown project to really help the executive team, boards of directors, the planning committee, create clear, concise, workable strategic plans to help them figure out where they need to take their organization over the next 3, 5, 10 or more years. As a part of those conversations, invariably, and we've had this with a nonprofit you were involved with, when we're talking about strategic planning, quite often we're talking about how might this organization need to reorganize, shrink or grow, or just alter internal operations, external products and services going forward. As part of those conversations, and we're talking about, given the adjustments in operations that are needed, who's going to do that? So we talk about talent development, we talk about succession, we talk about leadership development, we talk about succession planning. Then the third thing that I do with my company is one-on-one or group development. And that could be executive coaching. It might be leadership team coaching. I used to do a lot of long-term training with organizations, but I'm doing less of that now. I'm still doing seminars every now and then as part of a breakout or a keynote or a retreat, but really spending most of my time in an advisory coaching capacity with individuals or with leaders. The second part of your question is how I got here. It was something that, when planning my career, was unintended. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, small farming community, did not want to be a farmer, did not want to work in a factory, did not want to be a teacher. And I thought those were my three career paths at that time. So I got my undergrad degree in international business. And coming from a small town in Wisconsin with no international experience, I couldn't get a job. So I moved to Washington, D.C., got an internship with the State Department. Fortunately, it was the State Department's version of the military commissary system. So it was a business office. And in pursuing that career of helping people at our American embassies and consulates around the world get food, I was put into a position at a very young age, 22, where I was teaching non-business minded people, basically foreign service officers or their spouses or local nationals with limited business experience, how to run businesses, how to set up a commissary, how to set up a grocery store, how to set up tennis courts, at that time, videotape libraries, all of the life outside of the embassy, but on the embassy compound where our foreign service officers, diplomats, and their families could live outside of work. So basically where they get their entertainment and their food. So I was put in a position, pure chance, and it was totally fortunate that I was a consultant by the time I was 22, and had to learn how to help others think about business, run business, understand business in ways that made sense to them. As part of my work there, I also pursued my master's degree, and I got my master's in international business. And as part of my undergrad course, I'm jumping back to undergrad now, my capstone in undergrad was taught by this man by the name of Jim Farrell. And he was this thing called a consultant. And I had pursued my degree in international business because I said, I wanted to get out of the small town in Wisconsin. I thought I wanted to be a commodities broker. I don't know why. I had that idea. I thought it'd be fun. But when Jim Farrell taught this class, and he was a consultant, he talked about how he would help businesses and the leaders or owners of those businesses understand how to run their business better, how to be better leaders of the people they led, and how to grow great companies. And I just thought that's an amazing career field. So now flash forward again, I'm working with the State Department. I'm working with the commissary office. I'm teaching non-business minded people how to do business. I'm dealing with commodity brokers around the world. And I realize I will kill myself if this is my career field, because at that time it was so disorganized. This was way before the internet. And it was just a series of inconsistent, not organized behaviors of a lot of different people. However, I also worked with a number of consultants who were consulting to our office. And I was fortunate in that a couple of them liked me and worked well with me. And these were older men that were consultants, attorneys, and said, you don't have enough experience yet to be a consultant. You need to prove yourself and kind of, earn your chops a little bit, because if you want to be taken seriously, a lot of really experienced leaders need to know you understand what it feels like to be in their world. And I didn't want to hear that advice at the time, but it was the best advice that I got, because when it was time for me to start my company, I started as a training company. So I started training supervisors and managers and everything from time and stress management to project management. And in working with supervisory level and management, mid-level managers, you hear a lot in a training room. And me being me, what I learned, I couldn't keep quiet about. So I would debrief up the chain. And I would say, this is what I'm hearing in the training room. And I think you need to be aware of this because X, Y, and Z. And the X, Y, and Z would be, if they don't do something about it, they're going to have bigger issues than they currently had. And without knowing what I was doing, I was providing unsolicited advice, and I was earning their respect. And so little by little, my clients started pulling me into projects and asking me to do consulting work with them. And clients are the ones that got me into strategic planning, that got me into succession planning, that got me into executive coaching, because of the relationships that I have built over the years. And I've been fortunate in that I've got very long-term relationships with clients. I'm working with one right now that I've been working on and off with since 1996. And it's just a matter of always keeping what's in the best interest of them in mind, and being comfortable in telling them, Amos, I'm going to suggest that you think about this differently, because if you don't take action now, this is going to come back to bite you and the organization big time. And really having their backs and really trying to make my clients successful. So that's my story.
Well, that is an awesome story, and I think it always amazes me that the number of people, including myself, that kind of ended up where they are today, not necessarily on purpose, but it was a number of set things that happened that put things into motion, and we end up doing what we do. The other thing I can't help but to go back to, you mentioned something called videotapes and videotape libraries. Now, many of our listeners might not know what they are. So as most people know, most listeners have heard at some point or another, I am also an auctioneer, and I have to share this story that not long ago I was at an auction and I overheard, a 10 or 12-year-old with their parent holding up a videotape and said, Mom, Dad, what is this? And we've also had the same experience. My daughter, which sometimes comes to auctions and helps, one day I told her, I said, go get that box of 8-track tapes. And she just stood and looked at me, and I had to start laughing because who knows what an 8-track is? So anyhow, I had to make light of that. So, kind of thinking through your process and what you do, how many times do you have a CEO or a board that when you realize when you're getting started with them that, all right, they have too many priorities, there are too many things they're trying to do. Do you ever have to pare people down a little bit and say, I don't think you can focus on 26 major priorities this year? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Yes, it happened. And yes, it has happened. And it's one of the reasons why when we're helping a client create their strategic plan, one of the dedicated exercises is a very deliberate conversation around what do we need to stop doing. And it's one of those conversations that's very hard for an organization if a couple of factors are in play. Number one, it's really hard for them if they only think about strategic planning once every 3 or 4 years, because they don't think about it and don't manage their strategic plan as a dynamic document and a living document and guide that they're supposed to be referencing on a fairly regular basis to align all their work. Because if they were doing that, it would become apparent to them much sooner which activities they do that add no value or which activities are a waste of time and a waste of resources. So that's one of the reasons why we have a deliberate activity of what we need to stop doing. The other reason it's a challenge, and it's more of a challenge, at least from my experience, with nonprofits or foundations than it is in a private company or a corporate board, is getting rid of initiatives that are legacy projects or legacy systems. Because from my experience, individuals in nonprofits or on foundations on the board can stay around for years. Term limits aren't much of a thing there. And some board directors have a pet project that was theirs 19 years before, and they will not let it go. And it's just something that's always been done, but really doesn't add value anymore. And it becomes a situation of, because one person or just a couple people like it because it was great 15 years before, doesn't mean it's still adding value now. So that's where some of the delicate conversations around what's best for the mission versus what worked before. And it's a conversation that needs to be had.
So you said something there that the strategic plan, you kind of alluded to the fact, are we actually supposed to look at it? I thought you just created it, put it on the shelf, and then we call Liz back, and magically we completed all those things, and the next year you come up with a new one, or the next 3 years. So we actually are supposed to look at a strategic plan.
Yeah. And Amos, you can probably share horror stories, with your career. I have yet to come across a client that, when they would cycle me back once every 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, whatever cycle they were on, and if they hadn't regularly reviewed the plan within that cycle, they never got things done. They've got less than a quarter of them done typically, or completely veered off track, or best case or the worst case scenario, they couldn't even find their plan because they didn't even know where it was. So yeah, one of the best practices that I highly recommend with my clients, and I'm very fortunate that everyone that I'm working with right now is on this cadence, is after the plan is created and it's approved by the ownership team or the board, whoever finally gives their blessing to it, we then immediately start a quarterly cadence where every quarter we get together, bare minimum every quarter we get together and simply just review and update the plan. And that discipline, Amos, you can well imagine, it is transformative. I will tell you, with every client that we start, the first year is a pain in the neck. It's too frequent. Why do we need to be doing this? But as soon as we have just the first quarter review and we start tracking, and they start realizing within the first 3 months of the plan going live, things are already starting to look like they're going to slip. We're going to have to adjust dates. Something else has become a priority. Holy cow, where did this come? We weren't even anticipating that something has to be added to the plan, that something needs to shift. And again, it may sound really basic until you experience the exercise of pulling up the document that you had created and first saying, what did we mean by that? If captured clearly, people remembering what they were talking about, and then all of a sudden seeing the very dynamic nature of everything that they had included, including some aren't working their part of the plan. And so without even needing to say anything, there's a group accountability that starts to kick in. So yeah, working the plan, getting on a regular cadence, whether it's monthly, quarterly, at a bare minimum, twice a year, it does a lot to move a plan.
So now I've called you, I brought you in, we went through a strategic session, and I started out with 26 priorities, and you said, Amos, I think 26 priorities for your company, considering it's only you, is probably too many. So fighting tooth and nail, I've worked my way down to 10. Now I have 10 priorities, and my guess is over the next year, something's going to happen that I didn't know was going to happen. And so there's going to be some new things come up. How do we start to manage as a C-level executive, an owner, a board chair? How do we manage all of these priorities? And as well as things change, maybe a pandemic hits us, and all of a sudden what was important a month ago isn't now. How do we work into managing that? And how do you work with executives on how to juggle those things?
So for example's sake, let's say that, okay, you're an executive, and let's say that you have a small team. So you do have a team. It's not just you, because you said executive and you said a board. So regardless of the situation, in full candor, one of the things I do with every single one of my clients when we have a coaching or advisory session, when we need to, we'll stop back and say, is this mission critical? Is this mission critical? And it's a matter of sitting back and identifying, if you've got 10 things that you can't have 10 priorities, but you can have 10 things that are important. And the question is, of these 10 things that are red hot issues, what order do they need to be attacked? Because quite often some things just have to step out sooner rather than later, just given the timeline of their actions to get done. Some things have to step out sooner than others because of the sequence of events, and the people on your team or external stakeholders are going to be impacted. We've got to get the timeline moving. So which of these do we need to start getting in play? Because once they go in play, a bit of it, once we get it out, we don't have to really do anything for the next 8 weeks. That means the next 8 weeks, we can work on items 6, 3, and 10. And so it allows us to start sequencing. That's number one. Number two, though, also is when you look at your priorities in your team and your board, who should be handling these situations, these issues? Not everything should be you, the CEO or the executive or the CFO or whatever your title is. What should other people be handling? And even if, let's say we break this down, let's say this is a strategic plan for your division or for your team. The same thing. You shouldn't be handling everything. So who on your team has a technical expertise that you should be bringing into a conversation, if he or she's not already aware of what these initiatives and these priorities are, to identify, given what needs to be done and given what your group is capable of doing, who needs to be doing what? And how do you help get the resources for them to get it done? And resources might be subject matter experts, more money, capital resources, facilities, the project, additional team members, whatever. How do you clear roadblocks for them and yourself to get these things done? So identifying what to focus on to get movement really comes down into some basics of looking at timelines and pipelines to figuring out what sequences make sense, but then also getting real with yourself that to really be most effective, you shouldn't be doing everything because you don't have the bandwidth to do everything, nor probably the technical expertise. That's why you need your team. So the best leaders that I work with are ones that I am constantly asking them, why are you doing this alone? Why aren't you bringing the CFO in? Why are you doing this? Why aren't you talking to your board chair about this? And helping them get really clear on helping others get clear on how to step up and do their jobs.
Now, from a different angle of that, I think it's fairly common that you create a plan and you work your way through that. At some point, if that's a 3-year plan, about year and a half, maybe, even second year, you start to lose focus or something happens. Now, you've mentioned having quarterly meetings, which can bring that focus back, I would think. How can managers, HR folks, other people within the organization, how can they help the CEO or the board chair to continually keep that focus? How can others within the organization help the CEO keep focus?
That's a great question. And I should have been clear before when I said the quarterly updates. The quarterly updates are not just me and the CEO or me and the board chair. The quarterly updates are me and the team that created the plan. So it might be VPs, it might be division directors with the CEO, it might be a couple reps from the board. It's typically an enterprise-wide representation of the organization. And during those quarterly meetings, every person in that room has some part of that plan that they have to report out on, that they have to give updates on. But more importantly, Amos, what happens during those meetings, once we get them to understand how to do it and we gain a sense of comfort in the room, what ends up happening is we might have the VP of operations reach across to you, who is a VP of communications, and say, hey, Amos, heads up. This product is going to roll out in Q2. And the word that we're getting right now is some of the preliminary communication that some of our clients have heard from you and your team. It's not making sense. So I need to connect with you after this meeting, and we got to get that straightened out so you guys can have a smooth rollout on the communication and my clients and customers know what's happening. That example of just getting the leadership team to talk to one another across the organization eliminates a lot of the lack of clarity as far as what's happening, but it also takes a huge burden off the CEO or the president, exec, whatever the title is, of that person being the sole conduit of communication. And so that's how HR, operations, finance, marketing, communications can make others in their teams aware of what's in the plan, but also make others up the chain aware of what they need from them to get things done.
So if you have this all put in place, you got the quarterly meetings happening, something crazy happens, explodes, and all of a sudden, all the priorities need to change. How do you work your way through rapidly? And, the one answer could be we call Liz, right? That's a good starting place. But what would be your recommendation when those types of events are happening and something is happening? What are the steps that the leaders at that business or organization should take to start to reevaluate? What would you walk them through?
Well, I'll tell you what we do, because I'm doing this with two of my clients right now, is some of the critical strategic priorities that you had planned for, let's say, year 2, you got to put them on hold. And you put them on hold because whatever just hit your plate, unanticipated regulation change, unanticipated product failure, unanticipated lawsuit, unanticipated whatever, the outcome of that surprise activity that just hit your plate, the outcome of that is going to impact what you had planned for year 2. So you can't do what you had planned. So you put it on hold and you move it over to potentially year 3 on your plan as a go forward. And you got to deal with what's in front of you right now. I mean, COVID was a great example of this. COVID was the 3rd busiest year I've ever had in business because I was helping companies rewrite their plans to figure out what we thought we were going to do. Surprise, surprise, we're not doing. How do we stay alive and viable and relevant? And how do we deal with that right now? And so it's a matter, again, of going back to what I said earlier. What is mission critical? For a couple of my clients, when they had to work remotely or in a hybrid situation, Amos, it blew up in their face how terribly paper dependent they were. And they knew it going into it, but they didn't know it until COVID hit. And so guess what was a priority in 2020? It was some plans to digitize that they were thinking was going to take 3 to 5 years. They got done in 9 months. And so that was full hand stop. This is a new priority, because if we don't get this done, we're not in business. So it goes back to what is really mission critical, and what are the dependencies that you have built into your plan, that if something changes that's unexpected, how does that impact a potential subsequent action on your plan? And if it has a potential direct impact, you got to put what was on plan on hold and deal with the critical issue right now.
So one last question on that line of things. What about the overachieving group that they come in, they say, we're going to do the strategic plan. We come up with 2 priorities, and they say, you know what, this is a 3-year plan. We're going to hurry up and we're going to get all this stuff done in the first quarter of the first year, and then we can sail easy and free. Now, that could be a thought process, but I guess my question is, one, is that a healthy process for a company? And should they be revisiting and coming up with a new plan if they've really achieved all of those things? And as well, you know, from thinking about it from juggling all the different priorities, if you really achieve your 2 goals and you don't have a plan going forward, you know, for the next 3 years, you're just going to live on the fact that I did these 2 things as a company. They can't possibly, in my mind, stay focused. So have you ever had that happen where folks are kind of like, let's make this as easy as we can so that we can, you know, and that might not be the proper way of wording that, but they're not taking it to their fullest potential, or they complete it early and say, well, we're just going to wait until year 3 to call Liz back and get her back in here to do another planning and find out what our new priorities are. What are your thoughts? So
the 2-part answer, yes, it's happened where a client, I don't believe, is digging deep enough, and they're confusing operational activities with strategic activities. And so they'll start a session saying, well, we need to get all the data inputted from our customers, and that's going to be a big project. And I was like, I don't doubt that that's going to be a big project, but that's not strategic. That's an operational issue. So that has to happen, but what has to happen over and above it? So the first part of that, Amos, is helping them understand the difference between operational activities that are just work that needs to get done and busy work, because that keeps you going today. That's not going to ensure your viability going forward. And once they understand that, then it becomes a matter of, you know what, they might only be able to really focus on 2 or 3 strategic initiatives this year because they just don't have the bandwidth given the amount of operational work they have to do right now. So if they get their website redesigned, if they get an online shopping cart done, and if they get, I don't know, something else to kind of set up a more strategic infrastructure, that's probably going to be a big enough lift for them this year. The other part of your question of, you know, if you've got someone who has strategic goals, but they're really only for like the first quarter, you didn't say it this way, but does that really count? And in my mind, yeah, because I have a client right now that I'm working with. It's a smaller company. They've got probably about, I don't know, 15 employees or so, about a $12, $13 million company. And we just did their annual strategic update session or planning session. And in writing up the report for them afterwards and kind of laying out the timelines, the bulk of the initiatives should be well in play by the end of Q1 of this year. And when I initially look at that, I'm like, well, that's not very strategic. But when you actually look at what is in that first quarter, it's infrastructure that is integrated. That's this, that's that. And those mechanical pieces and technological pieces that have been building, this is integration time. And so when I took a step back and then debriefed with the ownership team, I said to them, I don't want you to be disheartened that you don't think you're doing enough, because by Q1, you're going to go live, and that's going to give us at least the next 2 to 3 quarters to test the data that's coming out of these new integrated systems, because as these work, this is what's going to allow you to scale. And so until that infrastructure is in place, they're not going to be able to scale to the way they want to scale. And so it's a matter of why would I encourage them to do more and just throw more on a plate just so a document looks like it has more meat to it by text on a page, versus really looking at what the work that they're planning to do is going to do for their company. The work they're going to do is mission critical. It's not busy work. So it's a great question. And I think this is where whomever you have helping you with your strategic plan needs to understand the impact of the work that you're putting on your plan. And is it going to be fundamentally a change maker for your organization, or is it simply going to help you clean up some operational inefficiencies?
Okay. So if there was one piece of advice that you could give to the CEO that's sitting out there right now listening and thinking, my business isn't big enough, or we're not complicated enough, we don't need a strategic planning, or we can do strategic planning, but we can handle it ourselves in-house. If you could give that person one piece of advice, what would that be?
Be careful. Strategic planning doesn't need to be complicated. I mean, I think, Amos, you can attest the work that we did with the nonprofit you were involved with. It wasn't that sophisticated. It was pretty straightforward. It was pretty quote unquote easy for the people that participated. And you got some clear direction out of it. So it doesn't need to be a big process. It just needs to help you get clear in what you need to do over the next, 1, 2, or 3 years, so that you can lead your team and point them in a direction that is aligned, that is focused, so that you have everybody working together and people are not guessing what you want them to do. And more importantly, they're not waiting for you to tell them what to do. You're starting to allow your team to think and use their skills and earn the money you're paying them, particularly if they're in leadership roles, to help you lead the organization.
And I will add, the reality is we obviously know that there's all kinds of people out there that offer strategic planning help and those types of things. But what I can say is that at that point in time when we brought Liz in, our strategic plan was lacking in maybe in some of the key points of really dialing in what is a priority, what's operational, those types of things. And I can full-heartedly say that when I kept that strategic plan on my desk and reviewed it every day, that made my job much easier, because it was so much easier to stay focused. Now, again, things came up, the pandemic came up, and a lot of things changed, and I don't remember the date. All I remember was when you came in for that last strategic planning, it was my first day back after recovering from COVID. So I know it was at that time period. Mm-hmm. And we had to reevaluate and look at those things. But just for me as the executive at that point in time, having that direction and knowing that I could share that with all the staff, all the volunteers, and say, here's our goal. Here's what we're doing. It kept everybody focused on that.
Amos, if I could share one thing for your listeners, because I think it was something that we talked about with your team during that exercise too, and you just touched on it. I would encourage anyone who is working with a board who may not be consistent in what they're asking of you, if you're the executive director or the CEO or whatever, that once you've got a strategic plan, and if you have a board and the board approves the plan, what happens then is the board has just set for you your game plan. That's your work plan. Like you just alluded to that, Amos. That was on your desk, and that's what you told your team. This is what we have to deliver, because that's what you're going to be measured your performance on. But what that means for the board is that there's no board director or chair or president who can unilaterally come to you now and say, Amos, now I need you to do this. Now I need you to do that, because the board as a body approved that plan. So if you have an individual director that comes to you and says, hey, Amos, I need you to do this now, you can simply show them the plan, say, okay, number one, do we have board authority to do that? And if we do, then number two, the board needs to tell me, what do I need to currently move off the plan so I have the bandwidth to move that on the plan? Because then all of a sudden the conversation changes. It was like, well, just do both. Well, I can't do both because the plan was set up to, this is my team's full capabilities. And you're able to have not contentious arguments, but much more open conversations with the board about the reality of what you can and cannot do and what they can and cannot do. And it keeps both sides focused on what is mission critical for the organization.
And it does the same thing in private industry. I often use, an example of a washing machine company that decides that they're going to go into the refrigerator company or refrigerator business, and they don't, nowhere was there a strategic goal or a plan. This is just a company that's out there saying, this is what I'm going to do. And lo and behold, they realize, at some point that they've cannibalized their good washing machine company to go into refrigerators. Well, Liz, it has been great having you on here today. And I always ask every guest 2 questions. These are probably my favorite 2 questions, honestly, because they're the only 2 that I can remember from time to time. But the first question is, what is your go-to management book that you, over the years, keep on your bookshelf and you continually go back to?
The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber.
Okay.
I love the book. I think it's a great book. I found it late after I had written a couple of my books, but I thought, I love it. He and I think very similarly. Yep.
And so the second question is, what is your favorite piece of technology today?
My favorite piece of technology today. It's going to sound really pretty basic, but my phone, because I am learning new little things that I can do with my phone every day. I have an iPhone, and every now and then Apple will make a quote unquote enhancement that I don't like. And so I'm able to figure out a way to work around it. And, as an example, I just figured out how to scan more effectively with my phone versus the way I had been doing it before. So yeah, it's just it's my fun little tool. Awesome.
And where can people find out more about you and get engaged with you if they would like to?
So my website is my company name, Weber Business Services. The URL is W as in whiskey, B as in Bravo, C as in Charlie, L as in Lima, C as in Charlie.com. They are more than welcome to go there. Once you're on my website, your listeners can see my blog. I have over 400 articles on strategic planning, succession planning, leadership, a whole gamut. They're all free. They're all available there. The 10 books I've written, you can go to the store. You can get links to Amazon or Barnes and Nobles, wherever, and get a copy of my book. They're welcome to go there and check me out. Also, I am the most active on LinkedIn, and my profile on LinkedIn is Liz Weber CMC, and Weber has 1 B.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much again. And for our listeners, don't forget to check out our website, our social media page, and check out our past podcast episodes if you haven't listened to them all. Until next time, thank you for listening.